And Daniela and Lisa Chambers.
Yeah, thank you, Lascan Corla. I welcome the opportunity to speak on this debate at second stage. I suppose we're not here to rerun the referendum or to re-argue the points that have been made time and time again, and to have the debate that has already been decided, not decided by us, not decided by this House, but decided by the people of this country, our citizens, who in a democratic vote on our Constitution in a referendum decided in an overwhelming majority to repeal the 8th Amendment. And that vote must be respected, and that's our job. Our job isn't to second guess or to question the result of that referendum. It's not our job to question the decision that our people have taken. It's not our job to question the validity of that vote just because we may not agree with it. But it is our job to respect that vote, and it is our job to give effect to that vote. The 8th Amendment is already gone. It went the day the vote happened. What we now have is a vacuum that we as legislators must fill with legislation. That is our job. It is the job we were elected to do. And it's not about imposing one's personal view to try and supersede the people's will. And I think we need to be reminded of that at times, because whilst we may hold very dear personal views on this issue, and I accept that it's very divisive, the will of the people was very clear. It wasn't a small win, it was a substantial, a very large win in terms of the repeal of the 8th Amendment and the yes vote. And as a country, we have had a very long and difficult debate about that issue. Not just in the last 2 years, but over many, many years. Arguably since 1983, actually, we've had a very long and difficult debate within this country on this issue. And it's been very painful for many people, particularly those women that have been affected, those women that have travelled over those years and had to, throughout that campaign, throughout the Citizens' Assembly, throughout the Oireachtas committee hearings, throughout the debates in this House and throughout the referendum campaign, had to sit silently and look at those posters, listen to those debates and listen to those differing views when we were all in here and out there discussing them, discussing those women and their families and what they had been through. Something that we will never understand because we didn't have to live it, but they did, and they're still living it. And I do want to acknowledge, and it's not about gloating or being triumphalist, I want to acknowledge genuinely that there were people on the other side of this debate to me, that there were people that felt as passionately about a no vote as I felt about a yes vote. And I can imagine how difficult that day was, you know, on polling day and particularly on the count day. Obviously we had the exit poll the previous night, but I saw firsthand how upset people were in the count centre in my own constituency that were campaigning for a no vote. And those were genuinely held views, genuinely held beliefs for various reasons. And that has to be respected. So I do want to acknowledge that there are some people that are very upset about this vote and very upset about the outcome. But that doesn't change the outcome. And that was that our citizens, in a 2/3 to 1/3 majority, voted to repeal the 8th Amendment and to provide for abortion services in this country. And they did that for numerous reasons, and many of us, I would say all of us actually in this House, have engaged with people, not just in their own constituencies, but we were, I suppose, engaging with people right across the country on all sides of the debate, women that had been personally affected and had taken different views on this. But it's really important that we do progress this legislation. It has to come into effect. The purpose of the legislation isn't to upset people. What it is there to do is to provide proper health care, proper maternity care, proper reproductive health care for the women of this country. To stop the necessity, the daily, the weekly necessity for Irish women to have to get on a boat or get on a plane and travel to another country to avail of their health care. Because something that people were very slow to admit and to accept was that we already had abortion in this country. We have abortion in this country. Women have abortions in this country every day, every week. If they can't afford or they find they're not able to travel, they procure the abortion pill online. So maintaining the 8th Amendment or maintaining the status quo wasn't going to stop that, it wasn't going to change it. What it meant was that we were just happy for people to travel or happy for people to avail of a healthcare system in another country, that we just didn't want to deal with it here, that we were happy to avail of the ease to which we can travel to the United Kingdom and to other jurisdictions to avail of a service that should be available to our women in their own country. And that journey has an impact. It has a lasting impact. And not just on the woman in question, but on her partner and on the family. And that impact doesn't go away. And I can imagine the pain that must have been there when this campaign was ongoing, to have all of that drawn up again and to have to deal with that and face that every day. Maybe sitting on the bus as you commute into work, looking at those posters, reading that commentary. And it was unpalatable, it was unsavoury, it was cruel at times. And some of it was just so debaseful that it was just so unnecessary. You'd have to question the motives of those people, or what the intention was, or what whoever designed those posters, how they really felt about women, I would have to question. In terms of the situation that still currently prevails, because in the absence of this legislation, and if we take our time getting it through the House, it means we are continuing to force women to travel. Women that find themselves with a diagnosis of fatal fetal abnormality, that devastating news, finding that there is no place to go, no advice available, no help available in your own country. So the medical team and the doctor that you've been with all the way through suddenly finds they can't talk to you, they can't even refer you, they can't help you. That's happening today, it'll happen tomorrow, and it'll happen the day after. So whilst there's no guillotine on this debate, I would urge deputies to be respectful, have your say, but don't try and filibuster the debate. I want to disagree with Deputy Tobin in terms of the referendum was just about repealing the 8th Amendment and that the legislation of the bill before us had nothing to do with that vote. I disagree with that. Clearly there was a reason that the bill was published. We discussed this at the Oireachtas committee, that there was a need to publish the proposed legislation so people would know what they are voting for. The heads of bill were published for that very reason. And there was good engagement. There was a very high degree of understanding and knowledge about what was being proposed in terms of what would happen in the event of a repeal vote and the 8th Amendment being removed. People understood the 12-week proposal. They understood what was allowed up to 12 weeks, what was permitted after that. All of that was because the heads of bill were published and that discussion took place. So I think it's actually disingenuous and incorrect to say that when people were voting that the bill didn't inform that voter, that it wasn't part of the context. Of course it was. And because of that, I think it would be incorrect to try and substantially change that bill in this House today or at any other occasion, because I do think it would actually go against the will of the people and what they voted for. It appears from some of the debate happening in the House this evening and some of the commentary outside of these four walls that there are some now seeking to restrict the remit of the bill or what it's capable of enacting in terms of the legislation, and in turn trying to restrict women's access to proper reproductive health care and women's choice, because that's ultimately what it comes down to, a woman's right to choose what happens to her, what happens to her body, what happens to her future. I had a constituent recently say to me that he strongly believed there should be a psychiatric test for any woman seeking to avail of an abortion, because clearly she couldn't be of right mind. That she mustn't know what she's doing, she clearly hasn't thought about it. It's that kind of insulting, derogatory commentary or opinion that has led women to take the stand they have taken, many hundreds of thousands of them, to say, no, it is my right to choose and I will have a say, I will have the only say over my future. And really it does come down to trusting our women. This suggestion that somehow, because it's a little bit handier to procure a termination, because you don't have to order the pill or make that trip to the UK, that somehow because it's a little bit handier, it'll be more of a flippant decision and you'll say, oh, sure, I'll just go ahead and have an abortion because, you know, it's a little bit easier to get one than it used to be. Again, that kind of commentary is so degrading to women. It is so insulting. No woman takes that decision lightly. Every woman that gets to the stage, gets to a point where she wants to procure a termination or have an abortion for whatever her reason, has thought long and hard about that decision, and she has her own reasons, and they are hers. They're not mine, they're not yours, and it's not for me to judge or for anybody else to judge. Again, the suggestion was made in this House this evening that there is an equal right to life between the mother and the unborn. It's simply not possible because the two are interconnected. So when we do face a difficult decision where a woman's health is severely at risk, or where she has been raped and is pregnant as a result of that rape, or where there is a fatal fetal abnormality and for whatever reason she feels she just cannot continue with that pregnancy. How can the rights be equal? They can't. There has to be a judgment call. And the best person to make that call is, of course, the woman herself. I mean, is the solution to those situations where a woman has been raped, is it really the solution to force her to remain pregnant against her will? Is that the suggestion of deputies in this House? That that is humane? That is respecting her rights, her bodily integrity, her right to decide her future, her right to have control over her body, when that control had been taken away from her to lead her into that situation? Is that really the solution of forced pregnancy? Clearly, the majority of our citizens said no to that, that was not a solution, that should never be a solution. And our citizens trust the women of this country to do the right thing. I want to take the opportunity to thank the many medical practitioners, so many of them, that advocated so strongly and so eloquently in favour of repealing the Eighth Amendment, not on a populist basis, not on personal opinion as such, of a personal view, but on a medical basis, because medically, they very clearly told us as a committee time and time again, they felt hamstrung in their ability to do their job, to actually provide proper health care for women in this country. And it's well documented and well evidenced that women in this country have lost their lives because of our abortion laws. That is, without question, that has happened. And that brings me to my next point around trust. We have to trust our doctors, and I do trust our doctors, and I found their evidence to our committee and the advocacy with which they engaged to be extremely persuasive. And I trusted that they were coming from a position where their ultimate goal was to care for their patient and to ensure that every woman in this country has access to the best of medical treatment whenever she needs it. I really think that the terminology being used by some speakers, that if you voted yes, you're somehow pro-abortion. It's not about being pro-abortion or wanting to advocate for that choice. It is about trusting women, trusting our doctors, and allowing the woman in question who finds herself in that situation, for whatever reason, to make that choice for herself. I don't think that we need to go down a road where we want to further control women and further control doctors as they navigate that most complex situation. And as I said, it's not a flippant decision that anybody makes. And no one should stand by in judgment of any woman, because we will never know her situation, and we don't know her situation. But I do believe the choice should be respected both ways. If you choose to continue with the pregnancy in very difficult circumstances, if you find yourself with a diagnosis of fatal fetal abnormality and you want to continue with that pregnancy, you should be given every support to do that, you and your family. There should be proper services in place, proper counselling in place, and every support that that woman should ever need. Equally, if you choose to not continue with the pregnancy for whatever reason, again, the proper supports should be available in this country, and that includes proper aftercare, something which has been lacking. Right now, today, any woman that has travelled to the UK for an abortion or has procured an abortion pill online, there is no aftercare, there is no support, there is nowhere to go. And that only compounds the hurt and the pain and the trauma even further, feeling as though you are a criminal in your own country for making a choice that you genuinely and truly believe is the right decision for you. Those advocating for a more restrictive legislation and those still advocating for a no vote in a referendum that has since passed still cannot answer the question around rape, still cannot answer the questions around fatal fetal abnormality. Their choice is just to put the head down and get on with it. That's the best option, to force a woman to continue in those circumstances, irregardless. I'm very glad that our citizens took a different approach. In terms of some of the concerns being raised by those seeking to restrict this legislation further, the idea that disability is still a ground for a termination, it's not. We voted against that at committee. We had a debate on that at committee. It's not part of the legislation. And I think it's very unfair to citizens, actually, to try and suggest that somehow it has crept in through the back door. It simply hasn't. Also, the suggestion from some that doctors will be forced to carry out terminations against their will, again, that's just utter lies. It's not true. And we shouldn't be peddling such nonsense not from this chamber. We should give due respect to the debate that we're having and tell the truth. Again, commentary earlier about babies being left to die in cold silver plates on the edge of some clinic. That is just utter nonsense. Again, it's not true. It won't happen. It will not happen. That kind of commentary doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help progress the legislation. It doesn't help have a proper debate and discussion on it. All it does is serve to instil fear and doubt among people. For what point, I don't know. I really don't understand why anybody would suggest that such horrific things will happen, because they won't. I do think that it's worth remarking that this was I think even using the word significant isn't significant enough. But the vote that we took, the referendum that we had, has had such a monumental impact on the women of this country and on younger generations coming forward. And to think that it's in the year where we celebrated 100 years of women's suffrage and the progress that we as women have made in this country over the last 100 years. And I think the debate we had around abortion, it forced us to look back over a long and dark history where women have suffered terribly in this country. And we look at the atrocities of the Magdalen laundries, the 2 mother and baby homes, other homes that carried out similar atrocities. That wasn't that long ago. That was a very recent past. But I think that we actually have reached a critical mass in terms of political life and in terms of women finding their voice in the last number of years. And these issues that really focus us to look as a country on how we treat women and how we look after women and how we facilitate their voices being heard and listened to, more importantly. This debate, I think, has done us good. And I think that we are in a different space and looking forward to a much brighter future for women in this country and a brighter future for our country because of it. Once we have services in place, and I genuinely hope that that happens as soon as possible, but that it's done properly, with proper consultation, and that the medical profession are with us all the way, because we want this service to be in place and to actually work and be accessible, and accessible to all women, regardless of background, socioeconomic background, financial position. Any woman that needs this service should be able to avail of it. We do need to look at proper counselling for women that find themselves in that situation. But as a society, we also have to look at how we treat women, how we treat single mothers, how we treat young mothers. And we need to do an awful lot more around proper health care generally for women in this country. And I know that the ancillary recommendations of the Oireachtas Committee report were referred to earlier. I think it's really important, Minister, that those recommendations are dealt with a sense of urgency, that they are given priority. For example, in terms of access to contraception, it's still expensive, particularly if you are a young woman that maybe isn't working or in school or in college. So these are practical steps that we can do to try and limit the amount of unplanned crisis pregnancies, because I do think that it's incumbent upon us as a state to try and do that. But it's also really important that we try and remove, that we succeed actually in removing the stigma attached to being a single parent, to getting pregnant when you're young, and also the stigma attached to having a termination for whatever reason you have one. That it should come down to choice and personal choice, and that we should each respect the other's right and entitlement to make decisions about their own person and their own future. We have to stop trying to control women, and we have to stop guilting our women. Those days are over. That is in the past, and we won't take it anymore. We are in a new era where women are equal. We have an equal seat at the table, an equal voice, and we will ensure that women's issues and wider societal issues impacting on our position and our participation in this society will be heard and will be listened to. And this debate proved that. There was cross-party, we all worked together, and we put our politics to one side, and the objective was to secure a yes vote in the referendum and then to see the safe passage of this really important legislation through this Oireachtas, so we can give effect to what was a democratic vote by the citizens of this country, a 2/3 to 1/3 majority in favour of repeal of the 8th Amendment. It was a historic vote. I feel honoured I feel proud of the small part that I played in that process, and I think it's incumbent upon us now to ensure that that process is seen through to its finish. Thank you.